The red dust covered everything. It whirled in spirals through the broken dome panels, settling like a burial shroud over the abandoned laboratories and living quarters of New Ares. 60 years had passed since Earth had officially withdrawn support from humanity's first Martian colony, declaring it forsaken after the catastrophic failure of the bioglass system. Now, the southern region of Mars lay in ruins, with shattered oxygen pipes and sand-filled structures standing as monuments to mankind's failed ambition. Lyra Kellen adjusted her helmet's oxygen flow and squinted through the viewport of her mining probe ship. At 28, she'd spent her entire career piloting resource vessels for private trading alliances. But this was her first mission to Mars. Growing up on Earth, she'd heard the legends of New Ares, how it had flourished briefly before communications went dark, how the last emergency broadcasts begged for rescue ships that never came. Her father had been an engineer here, though he'd disappeared when she was just 5 years old, leaving her with only fragments of memories about his work on the bioglass systems. Processing Station 17. This is AstraCorp mining vessel Hermes requesting docking clearance, she transmitted, guiding her ship toward the derelict outpost on the edge of New Ares' former protected zone. The station's landing lights flickered weakly, automated systems still functioning on minimal power after decades of abandonment. No response came through her comms. Not that she expected one. These outer stations were typically unmanned, serving only as collection points for resource samples from across the Martian surface. The last human presence here would have been maintenance workers, probably evacuated during the final days of the colony's collapse. As she brought the Hermes to a gentle landing beside the station's rusted loading dock, Lyra checked her mission parameters once more. Simple enough. Collect mineral samples from the old processing units, download any salvageable historical data, and return to AstraCorp's orbital station within 48 hours. The company wanted to assess whether reopening mining operations in this sector was financially viable. Straightforward, she muttered to herself as she secured her oxygen tank and checked her suit's integrity. Get in, get the samples, get out. Martian spring was transitioning from bitter cold to dust storm season, the worst possible timing for a surface expedition. Through her viewport, she could see the red horizon already darkening with the promise of approaching wind. She'd need to work quickly. The airlock hissed as Lyra stepped onto Martian soil for the first time. Her boots sank slightly into the rust-colored dust, and she paused, momentarily overwhelmed by the stark landscape. The processing station rose before her like a metal skeleton, while beyond it stretched the vast expanse of Mars, red dunes punctuated by the distant silhouette of broken domes that had once been New Ares. "Let's do this," she whispered, striding toward the station's entrance. Inside, the air was stale but breathable, thanks to the station's minimal life support. Lyra removed her helmet and ran a hand through her short, dark hair, her eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lighting. The collection chambers were exactly as described in her briefing. Rows of metal containers filled with mineral samples, meticulously labeled, but untouched for decades. She worked methodically, transferring the most valuable samples to her cargo containers, while scanning others with her handheld analyzer. 2 hours into her work, she discovered a sealed vault containing data crystals, old storage technology that might still hold information about the colony's mining operations. "AstraCorp will pay a bonus for these," she said, carefully placing the crystals in her secure pouch. The company valued historical data almost as much as mineral samples. Both could be sold to various bidders across the solar system. With her collection complete, Lyra prepared to return to her ship. A successful mission, completed ahead of schedule. She could be back in orbit before the dust storm reached full strength. That's when she heard it. A faint beeping from her communication device. Not a standard frequency. Something older, using a deprecated emergency channel. 3 short pulses. 3 long. 3 short again. The universal distress code. SOS. Lyra froze, her breath catching, The signal was weak, originating from somewhere beneath the processing station, deep in the forgotten storage chambers of New Ares. Protocol dictated she should report the signal to AstraCorp immediately. Unauthorized rescue operations were explicitly forbidden by her contract. Resource pilots were not search and rescue personnel. They were collectors. Nothing more. But something about the signal's persistence tugged at her. This wasn't an automated distress beacon. The pattern varied slightly each time, as if someone was manually triggering it. Someone alive, on Mars, in an abandoned colony. Lyra's fingers hovered over her comm unit, ready to alert AstraCorp. Then slowly, deliberately, she lowered her hand. Instead, she activated her wrist computer and triangulated the signal's origin. According to her scanner, it came from approximately 2 kilometers beneath the surface, through a network of maintenance tunnels that connected the processing station to New Ares' main storage facilities. "This is insane," she muttered, even as she gathered her emergency pack and retrieved her helmet. Completely against protocol. Yet, she couldn't ignore it. If someone was down there, someone who had somehow survived 60 years after the colony's abandonment, what kind of person would she be to leave them? Lyra sent a deliberately vague message to AstraCorp. Investigating potential valuable resource cache beneath Processing Station 17, extending mission timeline by 12 hours. Not technically a lie. Human survivors would certainly be valuable, just not in the way her employers would expect. The maintenance tunnel entrance was hidden behind a half-collapsed storage room. Lyra pried open the rusted door, revealing a dark shaft descending into Martian bedrock. Emergency lights still functioned at intervals, casting an eerie red glow that barely penetrated the darkness. "Hello," she called down the shaft, her voice echoing. "Is anyone there? I received your distress signal." Silence answered her. Attaching a cable to the entrance frame, Lyra began her descent into the tunnel system. The air grew thicker with dust and unidentifiable chemical smells as she descended. Her suit's sensors detected elevated levels of carbon dioxide and traces of methane. Not immediately dangerous, but concerning. The old environmental systems must be failing. After 20 minutes of careful climbing, her boots touched solid ground. She stood in a wide tunnel, its walls lined with conduits and pipes that once carried oxygen, water, and power to the colony. Most were broken now, hanging like dead vines from the ceiling. The distress signal grew stronger as she moved deeper into the tunnel network. Lyra followed it, marking her path on her wrist computer. If she got lost down here, no one would ever find her. As she rounded a corner, a movement in the shadows made her freeze. She raised her light, revealing a figure pressed against the wall. "Don't move," a hoarse voice commanded. A man stepped partially into the light, aiming what appeared to be a makeshift spear at her chest. He was tall and gaunt, wearing patched environmental coveralls. His graying hair hung in matted strands around a face weathered by radiation and time. Most striking were his eyes, pale blue and filled with suspicion. "I'm not here to hurt you," Lyra said, slowly raising her hands. "I picked up your distress signal from the surface." The man narrowed his eyes. "AstraCorp? Commercial Alliance?" "AstraCorp," she confirmed. "Mining probe pilot Lyra Kellen." The spear lowered slightly. "Oren Voss, former maintenance engineer, New Ares Colony." His voice cracked on the colony's name. "You shouldn't have come down here, pilot. But since you did..." He glanced back over his shoulder, seeming to debate with himself before continuing. "We need help." "We?" Lyra asked, her heart racing. "There are more survivors?" Oren's expression darkened. "Not survivors from my time. We're something else. The children, Mars orphans." He gestured for her to follow him. "I'll show you. But you need to understand something first. They've never seen Earth people, never been above ground, and they're all that's left of New Ares." As Lyra followed Oren deeper into the tunnel system, He explained in halting sentences. After the colony's abandonment, a small group of children had been born to the last colonists. When their parents died from radiation sickness and environmental failures, the children were left in the care of the few remaining adults. Gradually, those adults had also perished, leaving only Oren and an elderly woman named Meka to care for the orphans. 6 children, Oren said softly. Aged 5 to 13 now, born on Mars, never known anything but these tunnels. His voice broke slightly. Earth denied them citizenship. You know, when the colony was abandoned, anyone born on Mars became stateless, legally non-existent. Lyra felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. She'd known about the citizenship controversies. Of course, everyone had. But she'd never considered that there might still be people affected by those policies, surviving in the ruins of the colony. The distress signal, she asked. Why now? After all these years? Oren's pace slowed. Our oxygen recyclers are failing. Meka's health is deteriorating. And he hesitated. We've detected unauthorized mining activity near our secure chambers. I suspect gray market operations. If they find the children. He didn't finish the sentence. They arrived at a sealed door with faded lettering. Storage Chamber 23. Oren entered a complex code into a keypad, and the massive door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit space beyond. Welcome, he said grimly, to what remains of New Ares. The chamber beyond was larger than Lyra expected, perhaps 50 meters across, with a ceiling high enough to create the illusion of space. Years of ingenuity had transformed the industrial storage facility into a makeshift living area. Repurposed shipping containers formed small dwellings. Hydroponic gardens grew under artificial lights, providing sparse vegetation. Water condensers hummed in the corner, extracting moisture from the air. But what caught Lyra's attention were the children. They emerged cautiously from various hiding places, staring at her with wide, wary eyes. 6 children, exactly as Oren had said, ranging from a tiny girl of perhaps 5 to a lanky teenager of 13. Their clothes were patched and faded, clearly made from repurposed colony materials. All had the slightly elongated limbs, characteristic of those raised in lower gravity, and their skin was pale from life underground. An elderly woman sat in a chair near the hydroponic gardens, her thin frame wrapped in layers of fabric. She regarded Lyra with sharp, intelligent eyes. So, the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong despite her fragile appearance. Earth finally remembered us. Meka, Oren said. This is Lyra Kellen. She's not from Earth government. She's a mining pilot who intercepted our signal. The old woman's expression didn't change. Mining pilot, here for our resources. Then, not our people. Lyra felt a flush of shame. I didn't know there were people here. No one knows. Convenient, Meka said coldly. Then her expression softened as she looked at the children. These are our charges. Mars orphans. Everyone. Their parents died maintaining this colony long after Earth abandoned it. The children continued to stare, though the oldest, a girl with fierce eyes, had moved protectively in front of the younger ones. I'm Lisa, the 13-year-old said, her chin tilted defiantly. These are Arlo, Saren, Dax, Mira, and Tilo. She pointed to each child in turn. Arlo, a solemn-faced boy of about 11, nodded slightly. Next to him stood a girl of perhaps 9, Saren, who watched Lyra with unblinking eyes, but made no sound. 7-year-old Dax partially hid behind Lysa, while 6-year-old Mira openly stared with curious eyes. The smallest, 5-year-old Tilo, had visible burn scars on one side of his face. Yet his eyes held the same cautious intelligence as the others. They've never seen anyone from outside, Oren explained quietly. You're the first new person they've encountered in years. Lyra struggled to find her voice. This was beyond anything she'd expected, beyond anything anyone would believe. 6 children, born and raised on Mars after the colony's abandonment, hidden away in underground chambers while the rest of humanity believed New Ares to be nothing but ruins. "Your oxygen systems," she finally said, focusing on the immediate problem. "How bad is it?" Oren's expression was grim. 3 weeks, maybe 4 before critical failure. We've been recycling and patching for years, but the molecular filters are degrading. Can't be repaired anymore. "And your distress signal? Who were you hoping would answer?" Micah gave a dry laugh. "Anyone. No one." It was a final gesture of desperation. Her eyes narrowed. "The question is, now that you've found us, what do you intend to do?" The question hung in the air. What could she do? Lyra was a mining pilot with a small vessel designed for mineral transport, not a rescue ship. Taking 6 children and 2 adults aboard would strain her oxygen supplies beyond safety margins. Yet leaving them behind was unthinkable. "I need to report this," Lyra said slowly. "The Commercial Safety Authority will need to organize proper evacuation." CSAT, Oren spat the acronym. The same organization that classified Mars-born citizens as non-jurisdictional entities to avoid responsibility? They'll either ignore us or worse. They'll take the children for processing into whatever system Earth deems appropriate. "There has to be a legal path," Lyra insisted. "These are human beings. Children. To Earth, they're complications," Micah said quietly. "Reminders of a failed experiment. Evidence of abandonment." As they debated, Lyra's risk communicator chirped with an automated alert. She checked the display and felt her blood run cold. "Dust storm," she said. "Major front approaching, Category 4. My ship's systems are warning of orbital debris being pulled into the atmosphere." She looked up at Oren. "I need to secure my vessel or risk losing it completely." "Go," Oren said immediately. "Secure your ship. The tunnels will protect us from the storm." Lyra hesitated, looking at the children who still watched her with those solemn, wary eyes. "I'll come back," she promised. "As soon as the storm passes." "Of course you will," Micah said, in a tone that suggested she believed nothing of the sort. "I will," Lyra insisted, meeting the old woman's gaze directly. "These children deserve better than abandonment. I'll return with supplies at minimum. You have my word." As Oren led her back through the tunnels toward the surface, Lyra's mind raced with calculations and possibilities. Her ship could potentially accommodate 2 children at most, in addition to herself. 8 people total? Impossible without sacrificing safety margins beyond acceptable levels. "We've survived this long," Oren said, as if reading her thoughts. "A few more days won't make a difference." "How did it happen?" Lyra asked as they climbed. How did the colony really fall? The official reports cited environmental system failures. But there's always been speculation about other factors. Oren was silent for so long that Lyra thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow with old pain. "Planned obsolescence," he said bitterly. "The bioglass systems were designed with a 10-year lifespan. Replacements were supposed to come from Earth. When the funding for Mars colonization was cut, the replacement parts never arrived." He paused at a junction in the tunnels. The corporate entities that built New Ares knew exactly when the systems would fail. They just didn't care enough to prevent it. "My father," Lyra said quietly. "He was an engineer here. Alexander Kellen." Oren stopped abruptly, turning to stare at her. "Alex Kellen? The bioglass project lead?" Lyra nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "Knew him?" Oren gave a short, harsh laugh. "He was my mentor. One of the few who fought to save the colony when Earth began withdrawing support." His expression softened slightly. "I didn't know he had a daughter." "He disappeared when I was 5, Lyra said. "Official report said he was lost during the colony evacuation." Oren's face darkened. There's a lot the official reports got wrong. He seemed about to say more, then shook his head. We should hurry. That storm won't wait. As they reached the surface, the wind had already picked up considerably. Red dust swirled around them, reducing visibility to mere meters. Lyra's ship, barely visible through the haze, rocked slightly with each gust. "I'll return!" she shouted over the wind as they reached the entrance to the processing station. 3 days at most. If the storm lasts longer, I'll come as soon as it breaks. Oren nodded, his expression unreadable behind his protective mask. The children, he said. Whatever happens, remember they exist. They matter. Even if you can't return, tell someone who will care. With that, he disappeared back into the tunnel entrance, leaving Lyra to face the growing storm alone. She barely reached her ship before the storm intensified to dangerous levels. As she secured the Hermes and prepared for atmospheric turbulence, Lyra's mind remained fixed on those 6 solemn faces, watching her from the shadows of Storage Chamber 23. Mars Orphans, children of the abandoned colony, living proof of humanity's failure to protect its own. As her ship rocked in the violent winds, Lyra made a decision that would change everything. She would not report directly to AstraCorp. Not yet. Corporate interests would see the children as commodities at best, liabilities at worst. Instead, she opened a secure channel to her personal contacts. If she was going to save those children, she would need allies who valued human life over profit margins. The storm raged for 36 hours, confining Lyra to her ship and giving her time to formulate a plan. She inventoried her supplies, calculated oxygen requirements, and researched legal precedents regarding the Marsborn. The news wasn't encouraging. Statutes regarding citizenship for those born on abandoned colonies were ambiguous at best, actively discriminatory at worst. When the storm finally subsided, leaving a transformed landscape of new dunes and buried equipment, Lyra loaded as many supplies as she could carry and made her way back to Processing Station 17. The entrance to the maintenance tunnels appeared undisturbed, but as she prepared to descend, her sensors detected something alarming: multiple heat signatures moving on the surface, approximately 1 kilometer east. Using her optical enhancers, Lyra spotted 3 figures in gray environmental suits, moving methodically across the terrain. Their equipment was non-standard, lacking official markings, and they carried what appeared to be mining tools modified for combat. Graydiggers. Illegal mining operations were common enough in the outer territories, but these weren't ordinary resource pirates. The distinctive gray suits marked them as members of a notorious trafficking organization that harvested both minerals and human resources for the black market. Lyra ducked behind a collapsed panel as one of the figures turned in her direction. Had they detected her ship? Were they specifically tracking her movements? Or was it mere coincidence that they were exploring this area now? Whatever the case, their presence complicated an already desperate situation. If the Grey Diggers discovered the children, Lyra shuddered, remembering stories of Mars-born individuals captured for illegal medical research. Their unique physiological adaptations to Martian conditions made them valuable to certain unethical research facilities. And children, with their adaptable physiology, would be particularly prized. Waiting until the figures moved behind a ridge, Lyra quickly descended into the tunnel system. She needed to warn Oren and Meka immediately. She found Oren halfway to Chamber 23, his expression changing from wariness to recognition as she approached. "You came back," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would." Lyra handed him one of the supply packs. "But we have a problem. Grey diggers on the surface, moving this way." Oren's face drained of color. "How many?" "3 that I saw. Could be more. They're conducting a systematic sweep of the area." "They must have detected our power signature," Oren muttered. "We've been careful, but the oxygen recyclers draw significant energy. He gestured for her to follow him. Come. We need to warn Mecha and prepare the children. Chamber 23 was in a state of controlled activity when they arrived. The children were packing essential supplies under Mecha's supervision, their movements practiced and efficient. We detected the surface movements, Micah explained when she saw Lyra's surprised expression. Our sensors may be old, but they still function. She nodded toward Lyra's supply packs. So you kept your word after all. The gravediggers complicate things, Lyra said, setting down her supplies. If they're searching systematically, they'll eventually find the tunnel entrance. We've prepared for this possibility, Mecha said. There are deeper chambers, further from the surface access points, more difficult to reach, but safer. Lyra shook her head. That's just delaying the inevitable. The oxygen systems are failing, remember? You need evacuation, not a deeper hiding place. And how do you propose to evacuate 8 people on a mining vessel designed for one? Mecha asked sharply. Before Lyra could respond, her wrist communicator chirped with an alert from her ship's automated systems. She checked the display and felt her stomach drop. They've found my ship, she said. They're attempting to bypass the security locks. Orin swore softly. If they access your navigation data, they'll see my movements to and from the processing station, Lyra finished. They'll know someone's been accessing the tunnels. How long before they breach your security? Mecha asked. Lyra checked the alert details. My systems are designed to resist unauthorized access, but these aren't amateurs. 2 hours, maybe 3. Then we have no choice, Mecha said decisively. We move deeper and erase all evidence of our presence in this chamber. She turned to the children. Arlo, lead the younger ones in the evacuation protocol we practiced. Lysa, help me with the essential systems. The children moved with practiced efficiency, dismantling their living spaces and gathering survival supplies. Even the youngest, Tilo, carried his share, his small face set with determination despite his scarred features. Lyra watched them, struck by their discipline. These children had grown up preparing for disaster, trained from their earliest years for survival in an environment that had never been meant for them. I can try to return to my ship, she offered. Create a diversion, lead them away from here. Orin shook his head. Too risky. If they capture you, they'll extract everything you know. He hesitated, then added more gently. Besides, the children need you. We need you. The admission clearly cost him something. Lyra understood then how deeply Orin's protectiveness ran, and how desperate their situation must be for him to accept outside help. There's another option, Lyra said slowly, an idea taking shape. My ship's security protocol includes an emergency self-destruct sequence. Mecha looked up sharply. You'd sacrifice your vessel? If it means protecting these children, yes. Lyra activated her wrist computer. The explosion would draw CSAT patrols to investigate. Gravediggers avoid official attention at all costs. They'd retreat immediately. And strand yourself here with us, Orin pointed out. Lyra met his gaze steadily. I've made my choice. After a moment, Orin nodded. Do it. Lyra entered her authorization codes, setting the self-destruct sequence for 30 minutes. Enough time for the gravediggers to detect the imminent explosion, but not enough for them to disable it. As she confirmed the sequence, she felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. Her ship had been her livelihood, her home, her escape route. Now it would become a signal fire. It's done, she said, lowering her arm. We have 30 minutes before detonation. Then we move now, Mecha ordered. Chamber 42 is prepared for emergency occupation. It's 3 levels deeper and has independent oxygen recycling. As they gathered the last of their supplies, Saren, the silent 9-year-old, suddenly tugged at Lyra's sleeve. The girl pointed urgently toward the chamber's main environmental console, where warning lights had begun to flash. Proximity alert, Orin translated, rushing to the console. Someone's entered the tunnel system. They're at the upper level already.
How? Lyra demanded. It's too soon. They couldn't have traced the connection that quickly.
Unless they already knew about the tunnels, Micah said grimly. Unless this isn't their first visit to New Ares. The implications chilled Lyra. If the Grey Diggers had previously explored these tunnels, they might already know about the deeper chambers. The children's planned escape route could lead straight into a trap. Change of plans, Lyra said. We need to split up. Absolutely not, Oren objected immediately. Listen to me, Lyra insisted. If they're already in the tunnels, they're following a specific path. We need to misdirect them. She turned to Micah. You take the children to Chamber 42 through the maintenance shafts. Oren and I will create a false trail through the main tunnels, leading away from your position. Micah studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A diversion? Yes, that could work. She turned to the children. Change of plan. Emergency Protocol 7. The children immediately adjusted their activities. Lisa and Arlo directing the younger ones to gather different supplies. What's Protocol 7? Lyra asked Oren. Split movement with mission-critical protection, he explained. The children have drilled for this. They know to prioritize silence and speed, to leave no traces. Lyra was struck again by the harsh reality these children had grown up with, trained in survival protocols before they could even fully understand the dangers they faced. We'll need weapons, she said quietly. Oren led her to a storage locker and revealed its contents. Makeshift weapons crafted from mining tools and colony equipment. Lyra selected a shock rod, originally designed for clearing mineral blockages, now modified to deliver a disabling electrical charge. 25 minutes until detonation, she noted, checking her wrist display. Let's make them count. As Micah led the children through a narrow maintenance shaft in the chamber's floor, Lyra and Oren prepared to create their diversion. They deliberately scattered supplies along their planned route, creating the impression of a hasty evacuation. Make it convincing, Oren murmured, but not too obvious. These aren't amateurs. Lyra nodded, carefully placing a child's drawing where it might be spotted by pursuers. The simple sketch showed red skies and dome-like structures, a Mars that the artist had never actually seen from the surface. They had just finished laying their false trail when Oren's handheld scanner vibrated. Movement, he whispered. 3 signatures, approaching from the upper tunnels. Lyra and Oren retreated to a junction where multiple corridors met, concealing themselves behind abandoned equipment. Minutes later, 3 figures in gray environmental suits appeared, moving with the practiced caution of experienced hunters. Life signs confirmed, one of them said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air of the tunnel. Multiple subjects, moving deeper. Value assessment? Another asked. If the intelligence is accurate, 6 Mars-born juveniles, the first replied. Premium-grade biological assets. Karen facility is offering triple standard rate. Lyra felt sick. Her worst fears confirmed. The Grey Diggers knew exactly what they were hunting, and who would pay for their captives. The third figure, taller than the others, paused to examine the child's drawing Lyra had planted. Recent activity, he noted. They're aware of our presence. Proceed with caution, the first ordered. Capture protocols only. Undamaged merchandise brings higher returns. As the Grey Diggers moved past their hiding place, following the false trail, Lyra and Oren exchanged grim looks. These weren't just resource pirates. They were human traffickers with specific information about the children. 15 minutes to detonation, Lyra whispered, checking her display. We need to lead them further from Chamber 42. They shadowed the Grey Diggers from a distance, occasionally creating noises to keep their pursuers on the false trail. The strategy worked until they reached a large storage area where the tunnel system branched in multiple directions. Trail splits here, the lead digger announced. Thermal residue indicates... He paused, adjusting his scanner. Multiple directions. They've separated. Smart, the tall one commented. Vale, take the eastern passage. I'll continue north. Crane, sweep west. Lyra tensed as the three separated. This wasn't part of the plan. If they split up, at least one might stumble upon the actual evacuation route. The western passage leads toward Chamber 42, Orin whispered urgently. If they follow that route. Lyra made a split-second decision. I'll handle the one going west. You keep the others distracted. Before Orin could object, she slipped away, taking a maintenance shortcut that would allow her to intercept the digger, named Crane, before he got too close to the children's escape route. The narrow maintenance shaft forced Lyra to crawl on hands and knees, navigating by the dim light of emergency strips embedded in the floor. She emerged into the western passage just as Crane approached, his back to her as he studied his scanner. Lyra activated her shock rod and stepped forward silently. One clean strike was all she needed. Disable him quickly. Then, rejoin Orin. She was 3 steps away when her boot scuffed against a loose piece of metal. Crane whirled, raising his weapon, a mining laser repurposed for combat. Well, he said, his voice distorted through his mask. What have we here? A little rat in the tunnels? Lyra didn't waste breath on a response. She lunged forward, aiming the shock rod at his midsection. Crane sidestepped with surprising agility, firing his laser in a sweeping arc that forced Lyra to dive for cover. The beam struck an ancient oxygen pipe overhead, releasing a hissing spray of compressed gas. Alarms immediately began to wail throughout the tunnel system. Oxygen breach in Sector 12, an automated voice announced. Emergency containment initiated. Heavy security doors began to slide closed throughout the tunnel system, an old safety protocol designed to contain catastrophic leaks. Lyra realized with horror that the security system might seal off the children's escape route. Crane seemed equally surprised by the security response. He fired again, this time directly at Lyra. She rolled aside, feeling the heat of the beam as it passed centimeters from her face. Using the distraction of the alarms, Lyra charged forward, driving her shock rod into Crane's side. The weapon discharged with a crackling surge of electricity, sending him convulsing to the ground. Lyra didn't wait to see if he would recover. She sprinted toward the junction where she had left Orin, hoping he had managed to handle the other diggers. She found him locked in combat with the tall one, apparently the leader, while the third digger lay motionless nearby. Orin was clearly outmatched, bleeding from a deep cut on his arm as he desperately parried the leader's attacks with a piece of broken pipe. "Hey!" Lyra shouted, drawing the leader's attention. 10 minutes to detonation. Your ship is about to become a crater." The leader hesitated, glancing at his wrist display. "Vale, Crane, report." He barked into his communicator, receiving no response. He cursed and backed away from Orin. "This isn't over," he promised, his cold eyes visible through his mask's visor. Mars Orphans fetched too high a price to walk away. With that, he activated something on his suit and sprinted toward the tunnel exit, leaving his fallen comrades behind. Lyra rushed to Orin's side. "Can you move? We need to reach Chamber 42 before these security doors seal us out." Orin nodded grimly, clutching his wounded arm. "The oxygen breach complicates things. The automated system will lock down entire sections until the leak is contained." They navigated the rapidly closing security doors, racing against both the countdown to detonation and the colony's ancient safety protocols. Twice they barely slipped through doors as they descended, the massive metal barriers slamming shut behind them with finality. "There," Orin gasped, pointing to a reinforced door at the end of a corridor. "Chamber 42. If they made it, they'll be inside." As they approached, the final security door began to close. Lyra dived forward, wedging her shock rod into the mechanism to hold it open long enough for Orin to stagger through. The rod snapped under the pressure, and the door slammed shut behind them. Chamber 42 was larger than Chamber 23, clearly designed as an emergency shelter. Unlike the previous chamber, This one showed minimal signs of habitation. It had been kept in reserve, a final fallback position. Micah stood at an environmental console, her aged fingers moving with surprising dexterity over the controls. The children were huddled near a sealed inner door, their faces pale with fear.
"You made it,"
Micah said, not looking up from her work.
"Cutting it rather close."
Oxygen breach triggered the security protocols, Oren explained, collapsing onto a bench. Lisa immediately moved to his side, expertly examining his injured arm. 5 minutes to detonation, Lyra reported, checking her display. The leader escaped, heading for the surface. The others are disabled, but at least one might recover. The security doors will keep them contained for now, Micah said. But we have a more immediate problem. She gestured to the environmental readouts. The oxygen recyclers in this chamber are operating at minimal capacity. They haven't been properly maintained in years. Lyra examined the system. The ancient machinery wheezed and stuttered, struggling to generate enough breathable air for 8 people. How long will it last?
At current capacity? Perhaps 48 hours.
Micah's expression was grim.
And the security lockdown prevents us from accessing other chambers or their resources.
A distant rumble shook the chamber, dust drifting down from the ceiling. My ship, Lyra said quietly. Right on schedule. The detonation would bring CSAT patrols to investigate. But would they search the underground tunnels? And even if they did, would they help Mars orphans with no legal status? So we're trapped, Oren summarized, wincing as Lisa cleaned his wound with antiseptic from their medical supplies. Limited oxygen, sealed in by security doors, with hostiles potentially still in the tunnel system. Not necessarily trapped, Lyra said slowly, an idea forming. The security system responded to the oxygen breach, right? That means the central AI is still partially functional. Oren's eyes widened. Astra Prime. The colony's management AI? He shook his head. It's been dormant for decades. Basic safety protocols might still function, but the higher systems... Worth a try, Lyra insisted. If we can reactivate Astra Prime, we might be able to override the security lockdown and access other chambers, maybe even communicate with the surface. The primary interface was in the colony's control center, Micah said doubtfully. Impossible to reach from here. But there were emergency access terminals throughout the colony, Oren remembered, including engineering substations, Lyra finished, which would include emergency shelters like this one. They searched the chamber, eventually locating a sealed panel marked with faded Astra Prime insignia. The interface beyond was dead, its screens dark and unresponsive. Power cells are drained, Oren observed. We'd need to reroute emergency power from life support. That would further reduce our oxygen supply, Micah pointed out.
A calculated risk, Lyra countered. If we can reactivate Astra Prime, it might be able to restore full environmental systems throughout accessible sections.
After a tense debate, they decided to proceed. Oren and Lyra worked together to reroute power from non-essential systems, while Micah kept the children calm and occupied. Lisa proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the colony's systems, offering suggestions that sometimes surpassed even Oren's expertise.
My father taught me, she explained when Lyra expressed surprise. He was the environmental systems manager before he died.
Hours passed as they worked. The chamber grew noticeably cooler as they diverted heating power, and the lighting dimmed to emergency levels. The youngest children, Tilo and Mira, huddled together under thermal blankets, watching with solemn eyes. Finally, the ancient interface flickered to life, its screen casting a pale blue glow across their faces. Astra Prime Emergency Interface scrolled across the screen. Awaiting authentication. Oren entered his old maintenance codes, but the system rejected them. Too old, he muttered. The system won't recognize my authority after all this time. Try mine, Micah suggested, slowly making her way to the terminal. Education Division had higher clearance for emergency protocols. She entered a long sequence from memory, her fingers trembling slightly. The screen flickered, then. Authentication accepted, limited access granted. A simplified version of Astra Prime's interface appeared, offering basic system controls and status reports. Most of the colony's systems showed as non-functional or critically damaged, but the AI core itself was intact, operating in low-power conservation mode. Astra Prime, Orin addressed the system. Status report on current security lockdown. Text scrolled across the screen. Security Protocol 7A active. Oxygen breach in Sector 12. Containment doors sealed. Estimated time to automatic release, 72 hours. 3 days, Lyra translated. Our oxygen won't last that long. Astra Prime, Maka said clearly. Override Security Protocol 7A. Authorization Maka Saren, Education Division. Insufficient authority for complete override, the system responded. Alternative solutions available. 1. Repair oxygen breach in Sector 12. 2. Evacuate to surface via emergency shaft in Chamber 42. They exchanged startled looks. Emergency shaft? Orin repeated. I wasn't aware Chamber 42 had direct surface access. It was added in the final phase of colony construction, Micah explained. A last resort evacuation route, never fully implemented due to funding cuts. Astra Prime, Lyra asked. Status of emergency shaft in Chamber 42? Emergency shaft partially completed. Structural integrity at 78%. Surface exit sealed with standard security lock. Warning: no atmospheric adjustment chamber installed. Direct exposure to Martian atmosphere will occur upon exit. Lyra felt a surge of hope. We have suits and portable oxygen for short-term surface exposure. If we can reach the surface. And go where? Orin challenged. Your ship is destroyed. The Grey Diggers will be searching for us, and CSAT patrols will arrest us on sight. One problem at a time, Lyra insisted. Surface access gives us options we don't have trapped down here. Before they could debate further, the chamber shook with a violent tremor, far stronger than the one caused by her ship's detonation. Equipment crashed to the floor, and alarm systems blared to life. What was that? Lyra shouted over the noise. Astra Prime's screen flashed urgent warnings. Seismic disturbance detected. Mining explosives detonated in Sector 14. Structural integrity compromised. Tunnel collapse imminent. The Grey Diggers, Orin realized with horror. They're blasting their way through the security doors. Astra Prime, Maka commanded urgently. Locate the emergency shaft entrance in this chamber. A schematic appeared on screen, highlighting a section of wall that appeared solid but was marked as emergency access. Orin and Lyra immediately began searching for hidden release mechanisms. As they worked, another explosion rocked the chamber, closer this time. Dust and small fragments of ceiling rained down on them. They're getting closer, Lyra warned. We don't have much time. Arlo, the serious 11-year-old, suddenly pointed to a discolored panel near the floor. There, he said quietly. The seam is different. Sure enough, upon closer inspection, the panel had almost invisible hinges along one side. Orin and Lyra pried it open, revealing a narrow vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the wall, stretching upward into darkness. Suits and oxygen first, Lyra ordered. We'll have minimal time on the surface before exposure becomes dangerous. They had only 3 functional environmental suits, Orin's, Maka's, and the one Lyra had brought from her ship. The children had never needed suits, having never left the underground chambers. The children will have to share, Micah decided. 2 per suit, with portable oxygen. I'll go first, Lyra volunteered. Secure the exit, make sure it's safe. And I'll go last, Micah said firmly, to ensure everyone makes it out. As they prepared the children, organizing them into pairs and testing the portable oxygen units, another explosion shook the chamber, so close that chunks of ceiling collapsed, crushing equipment and narrowly missing Dax, who stood frozen in terror until Lysa pulled him to safety. "Now," Orin urged. "We go now." Lyra began climbing the shaft, her helmet light illuminating the narrow passage. The climb was difficult. The rungs were spaced for adult colonists, making it challenging for the children. Saren, the silent 9-year-old, climbed independently despite her small size, while Tilo had to be carried on Orin's back, his thin arms wrapped tightly around the man's neck. They were halfway up the shaft when the most violent explosion yet rocked the structure. Metal groaned, and several rungs tore loose from the wall, clattering down into darkness. "Keep moving," Lyra called down. "Don't stop!" She reached the top of the shaft and found a heavy circular hatch, similar to submarine doors on Earth. The locking mechanism was complex but functional. Lyra strained against decades of disuse, finally forcing the wheel to turn. The hatch opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a starlit Martian night above. Lyra pulled herself out onto the surface, quickly scanning the area. They were approximately 2 kilometers from Processing Station 17, the landscape transformed by the recent dust storm. In the distance, a faint glow marked the burning remains of her ship. One by one, she helped the others emerge from the shaft. The children's eyes were wide with wonder and fear as they experienced their first taste of the surface world, even if seen through the foggy visors of shared suits. Meika was the last to emerge, her thin frame almost lost in her ancient, environmental suit. She paused at the hatch opening, looking back down the shaft with an unreadable expression. "Meika, hurry!" Lyra urged. The old woman shook her head slowly. "The hatch needs to be sealed from below," she said, her voice calm through the comm system. "Otherwise, they'll follow us immediately." "We'll seal it from here," Orin insisted. "There must be a way." "There isn't," Meika said simply. The original design required internal locking, an unfortunate oversight. She looked at each of the children, her eyes lingering on their faces behind their shared visors. "I've taught them everything I could. Now they need someone to guide them into a future I won't see." Before anyone could stop her, Meika released her grip on the edge of the hatch and disappeared back down the shaft. "No!" Orin lunged forward, but Lyra held him back. "She's made her choice," Lyra said softly. "Honor it by protecting the children." The hatch swung shut with a final sounding clang, the locking mechanism engaging from below. Moments later, another explosion echoed from beneath their feet, and a plume of dust erupted from small ventilation ports nearby. "She collapsed the shaft," Orin said, his voice hollow with grief and understanding. "To give us time." They stood in silence for a moment, honoring Meika's sacrifice. Then the practical realities of their situation reasserted themselves. 6 children and 2 adults, exposed on the Martian surface with limited oxygen and no transportation. "The old emergency bunker," Orin said suddenly. "From the original landing mission, it should be about 1 kilometer northwest of here." "Will it still be functional after all this time?" Lyra asked. "Possibly. Those early structures were built to last. Simple, robust designs with redundant systems. It was their only option." With shared suits and dwindling oxygen, they set off across the Martian landscape. The younger children struggled with the uneven terrain and lower gravity, requiring frequent assistance. Lisa took charge of Saren and Dax, while Orin carried an exhausted Tilo. Arlo helped Mira, the 6-year-old's eyes wide with wonder despite their desperate circumstances. The dust storm had abated, but the air remained hazy, limiting visibility. Twice they had to stop and take cover as automated CSAT drones passed overhead, likely investigating the explosions and ship destruction. After what seemed an eternity, they reached the emergency bunker, a low, dome-shaped structure half buried in red soil. Its exterior was weathered but intact, the entrance partially obscured by drifting sand. Orin accessed the manual override, and the heavy door groaned open, revealing a dark interior. They hurried inside, sealing the door behind them. The bunker's emergency systems activated at their presence, ancient lights flickering to life and revealing a Spartan but functional space. Basic life support systems hummed as they initialized, recycling the thin atmosphere into breathable air. Oxygen levels rising, Oren reported, checking the environmental console. Basic systems functional. We can remove the suits. The children emerged from their shared environmental suits with visible relief, though they remained huddled together, overwhelmed by the events of the past hours and their first experience of the surface world. Lyra took stock of their situation. The bunker had emergency rations and water recycling, but limited communications capabilities. Their oxygen would last longer here than in the collapsed chambers below. But it wasn't a permanent solution. "What now?" Oren asked quietly, once the children were settled. "CSAT will eventually find us here." "That might be our best option," Lyra admitted. "Better CSAT than the Grey Diggers." "You don't understand what CSAT would do with Mars-born children," Oren said bitterly. "The legal system doesn't recognize them. They'd be processed as non-jurisdictional entities, placed in research facilities or, at best, separated into institutional care with no rights or standing." "Then we need to make sure that doesn't happen," Lyra said firmly. "We need to make them too visible to disappear."
What do you mean?
"Information is power," Lyra explained. "If the existence of Mars orphans becomes public knowledge, if their faces and stories spread across Earth media, then CSAT and the government would be forced to treat them humanely. And how do we accomplish that from an emergency bunker on Mars?" Lyra examined the communication console. "This bunker must have emergency broadcast capabilities, designed to contact orbital stations or passing ships. If we can boost the signal strength..." They worked through what remained of the night, modifying the communication array with parts salvaged from their equipment. The children helped where they could, Lisa and Arlo proving particularly adept at following technical instructions. By morning, they had assembled a rudimentary but powerful transmitter capable of reaching Earth news networks directly. Lyra composed a message explaining the situation and attached visual documentation of the children, living proof of New Ares' abandoned legacy. "Ready to transmit," she announced. Before she could activate the signal, proximity alarms blared. The external cameras showed multiple CSAT patrol vehicles surrounding the bunker, armed personnel establishing a perimeter. "Too late," Oren said grimly. The bunker's communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. "Attention occupants of Emergency Bunker E7. This is Commercial Safety Authority enforcement. You are in violation of restricted territory statutes. Surrender immediately." Lyra and Oren exchanged looks. "They don't know about the children yet," Lyra whispered. "This might just be a response to the explosions and my ship's destruction." "Which gives us leverage," Oren realized. "Transmit the message now, while we still can." Lyra activated the transmitter, sending their prepared message directly to major Earth news networks. The system confirmed successful transmission just as the bunker door mechanism began to cycle, CSAT overriding their locks. "Children," Oren said calmly, gathering them close. "Remember what Mecca taught you. You are human beings with dignity and rights. Stand tall." The door opened to reveal armed CSAT officers in full tactical gear. They froze at the sight of the children, clearly unprepared for this discovery. "Lower your weapons," Lyra commanded, stepping forward. "These are the Mars orphans of New Ares colony. Their existence has just been transmitted to every major news network on Earth." Hours later, they sat in a CSAT medical isolation facility, undergoing evaluation and processing. The children were being examined by medical personnel, their unique physiological adaptations documented with poorly concealed fascination. Lyra and Oren were separated from the children, confined to an interrogation room. CSAT officials had questioned them extensively about the underground chambers, the Grey Diggers, and most importantly, the legal status of the Mars-born children. Your transmission caused quite the uproar, a senior CSAT official informed them. Earth governments are scrambling to formulate a response. The existence of Mars orphans raises complicated legal questions. They're children, Lyra said firmly. Human children who deserve protection and care. Children with no legal status, no citizenship, born on an abandoned colony that legally ceased to exist 60 years ago. The official countered. The precedent this creates is one of basic human decency, Orin interrupted. Or would Earth prefer to be known as a civilization that abandons its children on dying planets? The public pressure proved effective. Within weeks, emergency funding was allocated for a temporary facility, dubbed the New Ares Rehabilitation Center, NARC. The children were transferred there, along with Lyra and Orin, who had refused to be separated from them despite CSAT's attempts. The center was Spartan, but adequate. A series of prefabricated structures erected near one of the more stable remaining domes of the original colony. Medical staff, educators, and social workers were brought in from Earth, many volunteering specifically to help the Mars orphans whose story had captured public imagination. Lyra and Orin, though not officially recognized as guardians, became de facto caretakers, helping the children adjust to their new circumstances and advocating for their rights in the complex legal proceedings that followed. 3 months after their rescue, Lyra stood at the viewport of the center's observation room, watching Arlo and Lisa play a modified version of soccer with some of the volunteer staff. The children's movements, adapted to Mars' lower gravity, gave them an advantage they clearly enjoyed. Even Saren, who still rarely spoke, participated enthusiastically. Orin joined her at the window. His injured arm healed, but leaving a prominent scar. New funding approved, he reported. Earth governments have committed to maintaining the center for at least 5 years, while they debate permanent solutions. 5 years, Lyra repeated. Better than nothing, I suppose. Much better than what they had before, Orin pointed out. And public support continues to grow. There's even talk of expanding the program to include educational opportunities, perhaps eventual relocation to Earth for those who want it. Lyra nodded, though something in her expression remained troubled. And after that? What happens to them when public interest fades? When the next crisis diverts attention elsewhere? We'll be here, Orin said simply, for as long as they need us. Later that evening, as Lyra helped Tylo with his reading lesson, the young boy suddenly looked up at her with his solemn eyes. Will we ever have to go back to the tunnels? He asked, his small voice serious. Lyra shook her head firmly. No, Tylo, you'll never have to hide underground again. Good, he said, returning to his book. I like the sky. That night, Lyra received a transmission from Earth, data regarding plans for a proposed survival belt around Mars, a massive undertaking that would create a habitable zone through atmospheric engineering. The project was theoretical, its funding uncertain, its timeline measured in decades rather than years. But it existed, a potential future where Mars might become more than a mining outpost or abandoned experiment. She stood at the edge of the observation dome, hand pressed against the glass as she gazed out at the deep red sunset, painting the Martian landscape. In the distance, the lights of CSAT patrols moved across the horizon, and further still, the faint outline of new mining operations taking shape. The Mars orphans were no longer alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever legal battles and political debates might come, they had taken their first steps into a wider world that now knew they existed. We make our own future, Lyra whispered, echoing words Meka had spoken to the children in those final days underground. As the stars began to appear in the darkening Martian sky, Lyra made a silent promise to the 6 young lives now entrusted to her care. They would never be abandoned again.